Hey everyone, welcome to the horror of medical racism. When we think of horror, we usually imagine monsters, ghosts, or something supernatural. But Lovecraft Country reminds us that the real monsters aren't just the ones in the dark, they're human. They're the people and systems that use medicine and science as tools of racism. I'm Leonardo De Lacerda, and I'll be your host today. Joining me are my teammates Susannah Diaz, Tabata Delgado, and Thaissa Mondesir. Together, we'll explore how Lovecraft Country uses horror to reveal the real-life nightmares of medical racism both in history and today. Before we get into the show, we have to talk about the real events that inspired it. Take the Tuskegee Syphilis Study, for example. From 1932 to 1972, hundreds of black men were lied to. They were told they were being treated for bad blood, but in reality, doctors withheld treatment to watch how syphilis would progress. Many of those men died, and their families carried that pain for generations.
That one always makes my stomach turn. The worst part is that it wasn't hidden. It was approved by the US government. It carried out for 40 years.
Exactly. And it wasn't the only case. There was the eugenic movements, where so-called scientists claimed that people could be classified as fit or unfit. Thus, thousands of black people, immigrants, and the poor were forcibly sterilized, all in the name of science.
And then there was Henrietta Lacks. Her cells were taken without her consent in 1951. Those cells, known as HeLa cells, were the first to live indefinitely in a lab. They've been used for vaccination research, cancer treatments, and more. But she never gave permission, which is crazy. And her family didn't even know about it for decades.
It's awful. Henrietta helped change the world, and yet her name wasn't even acknowledged until recently.
And we can't forget about Dr. J. Marion Sims, often called the father of modern gynecology. His medical breakthroughs came from experimenting on enslaved black women without anesthesia or consent. His legacy is still praised, but the women he used are rarely named or even remembered. When you think about it, it's really disturbing how much medical progress was built on exploitation. Thus, Lovecraft Country takes the truth and turns it into horror, showing how science has always had a dark side whenever power goes unchecked. And when we look even further, we see that medical racism didn't just shape science, it shaped public trust. These stories didn't happen centuries ago, they happen within living memories. Many black families today have grandparents who were alive during Tuskegee or who grew up hearing about hospitals refusing to treat them. That generational fear doesn't just happen or disappear. It gets passed down, shaping how communities view medical care even today.
Right. Many families, even now, can walk into a clinic and feel like their symptoms are being ignored. It's not paranoia, it's history repeating itself.
And that's why it's important to acknowledge that for many black Americans, the healthcare systems have never been a safe place. When we talk about health disparities, those are just numbers. They're consequences of centuries of exploitation, forced experimentation, and unequal treatment.
And it's not only about trust in the system, it's about survival strategies developed over generation. Many black families learn early on to question medical recommendation, to seek second opinion, to advocate fearlessly for themselves because they know the cost of being dismissed. These habits aren't born from fear, they're born from experience. They are acts of protection shaped by history.
Exactly, and that's why conversations about compliance in medicine often miss the point. You can't expect patients to comply with a system that has a long history of harming them. Trust has to be earned, and that starts with acknowledging the truth, not avoiding it.
Now let's talk about how the show brings those ideas into life. Specifically, one of the most powerful scenes in Ruby's transformation was in episode 5. She drinks a potion that turns her into a white woman. At first, she feels free. She can walk into stores, apply for jobs, and not be judged by her skin. But the transformation process is brutal. Her skin literally peels away. Her body breaks down and rebuilds herself.
That scene is really hard to watch. It's a metaphor for how painful it is to conform to a society that doesn't accept you for who you are.
Exactly. It's body horror with a purpose. Then the show asks, what does it cost to fit in? What parts of yourself do you have to destroy? Then there's Christina Bravewife. She transforms into a woman named William to gain access to spaces that will never respect her as a woman. She manipulates and experiments on others to gain power. This shows another example of how the pursuit of control and knowledge can become its own kind of horror in the show.
What really stood out to me is that the show connects science, power, and identity. It's about who gets to experiment and who gets experimented on.
That's such an important point. The show turns real historical pain into literal monsters. The horror isn't just random, it's rooted in the truth.
When I watched those scenes, I felt angry. It wasn't just scary, it was frustrating because it reflected real things that have happened. It felt too close to reality.
That's the genius of it. The horror isn't about the creatures, it's about how society creates them for racism and dehumanization. Lovecraft Country constantly reminds us that the scariest experiments aren't the magical ones. They're the ones done by people in lab coats. When Christina experiments on others for her own gain, it mirrors the real scientists who justified harming black bodies in the name of research. Even the show's use of shapeshifting symbolizes how black people have historically been forced to change themselves, behavior, speech, and appearance, just to survive systems built against them.
And the monsters in the show aren't random. They represent fear that comes from a society where being black already makes you vulnerable. Even scenes without the supernatural creatures feel terrifying because of the societal reality behind them.
The show blurs the line between literal horror and the metaphorical horror of racism. It forces the audience to confront how violent, scientific, medical, or political gets normalized when people look away.
But this concept also raises a deeper question about identity, body autonomy, and the history of medical exploitation. In terms of Ruby's transformation, it wasn't just physical, but more a representation of the psychological fragmentations caused by living in a society where ethnicity determines how people treat her. Every time she sheds her skin, the show forces us to confront how racism demands that black people shrink, twist, or hide parts of themselves just to avoid harm.
And I think what makes Ruby's story even more powerful is that the transformation is portrayed as both seductive and horrifying. The freedom she experiences while passing as white feels good to her at first. She gets promoted. She's treated with respect. She's finally seen as qualified. But that feeling comes with a cost. Because when it's built on a lie created by a system that values whiteness over everything, the horror is that she had to become someone else entirely just to be treated like a human being.
Christina also represents something important in this conversation. She uses magic the way white supremacy uses power, selectively, strategically, and without accountability. Her ability to switch bodies to access male privilege mirrors how institutions shapeshift to maintain control. Policies change, language change, but the power structure often stays the same. Christina's transformations show how privilege adapts to preserve itself.
And then there's violence of experimentation throughout the show. Characters are kidnapped, dissected, and altered without consent. These moments reflect real historical atrocities, from the forced exploitation of enslaved people to modern clinical trials. The show doesn't dramatize these events for entertainment, it exposes the truth hidden beneath the surface of American ideal history.
There's also a theme of erasure. Characters who are experimented on often lose part of themselves, memories, identity, or even their humanity. This mirrors how medical racism dehumanized entire communities by treating them as objects rather than people. The horrors in the show comes from watching characters fight to reclaim the very pieces of themselves that society tries to take away.
And honestly, what makes the horror so effective is that magic in the show isn't just random. It's systemized. It's ritualistic. It has rules, just like medical systems. which also relies on procedures, hierarchies, and institutions. The show asks us to consider what happens when the people who control these systems lack empathy or moral responsibility.
We like to think those days are over, but the reality is, medical racism hasn't just disappeared, it's evolved. A study published by the JAMA Network Open found that black patients are less likely to receive pain medication than white patients, even though when they're reporting the same pain levels.
And the numbers for maternal health are quite devastating. Black mothers are 3 to 4 times more likely to die from pregnancy-related complications than white mothers. That's not because of biology, it's because of bias, lack of access, and systematic neglect.
Right, the same systems that once used black people for experiments still don't treat them equally today.
It's like history repeating itself, just dressed up in a more polite language.
So, how do we specifically fix that?
It starts with education, teaching future healthcare professionals the full history of racism in medicine and how it still affects patients today.
And holding institutions accountable. Hospitals should track racial disparities and take real steps to fix them, instead of just talking about diversity.
And empathy has to be the center of it all. Medicine can't just be about science, it's about people. Listening, believing, and respecting every patient equally is how we start to change things. But change also demands honest conversations. Healthcare isn't just about treating symptoms, it's about understanding people's lived experiences. Future nurses, doctors, and healthcare workers need to know why some patients distrust them. That distrust did not come out of nowhere. It came from events like Tuskegee's, from forced sterilizations, from unequal treatments in hospitals. When we acknowledge that pain instead of dismissing it, we build better relationships and overall better care.
And representation matters. When black patients see healthcare workers who look like them, who understand their culture and their history, trust becomes possible. Diversity isn't just a checkbox, it's a part of healing.
And the psychological impact is just as harmful. Imagine going into the hospital and feeling like you have to prove your pain, like your systems aren't going to be taken seriously unless you fight for them. That emotional labor builds up over time. It becomes part of the patient experience, and it affects how people seek care, how much they trust their providers, and even how well treatment works. Stress, trauma, and mistrust plays a role in health outcomes too.
There's also the issue of implicit bias in clinical decision making. Studies have shown that medical students and residents sometimes hold false belief about biological differences between black and white patients, like thinking black skin is thicker or that black people feel less pain. These myths directly influence how care is delivered. When bias shape diagnosis and treatment, the consequences become life or death.
Lovecraft Country mixes horror and history to remind us that the scariest things aren't always fiction. The show's monsters might be imaginary, but the pain behind them was and still is very real.
By understanding that history, we can stop pretending medicine is neutral and start seeing where it's failed people. Remember, sometimes the scariest things aren't hiding in the shadows. They're in the systems we choose not to see.
Exactly. The horror isn't just in the past. It's in what happens when we forget that history or act like it doesn't matter.
The first step to change is acknowledging the truth, no matter how uncomfortable it is.
Thank you for listening to The Horror of Medical Racism. I'm Leonardo De Lacerda, joined by Susannah, Tabata, and Thaissa. Remember, sometimes the scary things aren't hiding in the shadows. They're in the systems we choose not to see.